Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Become rain, shine, or anything in between. We're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And welcome to the biggest single commit on paper for K-State, enough to warrant, or in K-State football history, again, on paper. And we're here to cover it. It gets its own episode, and we even pushed back one other episode because of it. And if you hear a bell, that is my cat. That is Wunkus. And she's a kitten, so she runs around a lot, and sometimes you hear the bell.
We've added a new alley cat to the family.
And its name is Wunkus. But before we get into the commitment of Linkon, we do want to thank the sponsor of the episode. That is Greg Arthur. If you want to join him on the list of sponsors and have your name read out at the beginning of every episode, please be sure to check out the official Alleycat supporters link in the podcast and Twitter bios. But let's just dive headfirst into the commitment of the Goodland, Kansas tight end prospect, Linkon. And there's one important modifier that I left out there, and that is 5-star from Goodland, Kansas, Linkon. And it's a legitimate recruiting win. And a big reason is not only is he a 5-star, but there were some peer programs that we went head-to-head with and actually ended up beating out. So, just before we get into the recruit himself, I think it's important to talk about the schools that we beat out.
Yeah, Oregon and A&M were right there. Oregon, they've been dipping into Kansas a lot recently, which is hopefully not going to be too much of a thorn in our side going forward, but it's probably going to be to a certain degree. They just pulled Desan Brame out of Derby. They were in the final 3 for Avery Johnson last year, and they really wanted him pretty badly. And then they wanted Linkon really badly as well. So Oregon, that's a major, major threat that, a couple years ago, K-State probably does not defeat. But we're looking at a very different K-State football right now. And then you also have Texas A&M, who wasn't really in the race until Colin Klein. The traitor. He went down. He and Linkon had a really good relationship, it seems, because Klein was mentioned a few times in his commitment ceremony, even though A&M wasn't the pick and they may have not even been second. They were probably third. So those are the 2 big teams that K-State went up against. But Linkon had a total of 28 Power 5 or Power 4 offers, including K-State. So that's 27 other schools in one way or another that K-State had to deal with for a 5-star recruit. And that includes a lot of your usual suspects, like Alabama offered, Auburn offered, Florida offered, Miami, Michigan, Mizzou, Nebraska, Notre Dame, OU, Penn State, Texas, Tennessee. There's a lot of huge names on that list, and that's not even including A&M and Oregon, who ended up being the biggest threats in the end. And those are 2 schools that we know have massive treasure chests of NIL. But K-State has a pretty significant treasure chest of its own now. Some pretty big steps have been made in that area. But this was no doubt about it, massive recruiting win. On paper, it's probably the biggest in school history. If you want to get down to like positional value and stuff like that, then there's a whole bunch of different varying arguments to be made. Yeah. But purely on paper, this is the biggest recruit and biggest recruiting win in the history of K-State football. And if you take us back to about 3 years ago from now, when we were just starting the show and it seemed like the Big 12 was going to implode, and you told me that 3 years later K-State was going to be pulling in a 5-star recruit, I would have been over the moon because K-State football has come a long, long way to get to this point. And also a lot of those highly recruited or highly ranked recruits that he beat, most of those guys are from the very, very early days of recruiting rankings where they were a little less reliable for the most part. A lot of those guys were junior college transfers, and that was back when they rated JUCO transfers much more highly than they do now. And most of those guys didn't even pan out at K-State anyways. Really, the only other guy in the top 10 that really was a guy was Josh Freeman. But yeah, Linkon Cure, the K-State was the first one on him, and that ended up paying off in the end.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best way to describe it, is that K-State was the first one to identify Linkon Cure. And, that's not particularly uncommon. K-State is pretty often the first team to identify talent. It's not a joke. I think it used to be a joke. I don't think it's a joke anymore that there's a reason why a bunch of Power 5 offers come after K-State. It's because a bunch of teams are waiting to see if K-State does it. But of course, we have to rub this fact in. Linkon Cure did end up picking K-State over the other school in Kansas, and that is despite the fact that his brother is now playing for KU, which is A, hilarious, and B, is this what happened? I don't know. I have no insider information on this. But I don't think that a D2 walk-on gets a scholarship opportunity at a D1 university just randomly. I don't think that just randomly happens. And I think it's probably best to leave it at that.
I'm not going to leave it at that. I feel genuinely bad for Linkon Cure because he was used, I think, entirely as a bargaining chip here. I will say it's probably going to be fun for the Cure family. Maybe not fun. But at the very least, interesting to be on opposite sides of the Sunflower Showdown in certain respects. I have no doubt that Linkon Cure is like a quality football player, but I think it's pretty telling that KU offered him a spot because I don't think they would have otherwise. K-State had the opportunity to offer him, I bet, and maybe didn't. But no, it's definitely an interesting situation. I know KU was listed in the top 4. I didn't really buy that they were that close in this recruitment. It just didn't ever really make any sense to me. The only connection there is really Leighton, and that was a pretty obvious play, I think, from the very beginning. But it was definitely interesting, I guess, to see their hat on the table at the very least. And you can make it that what you will. That's, maybe a couple of years ago that wouldn't have happened for KU in the same way a couple of years ago this wouldn't have happened for K-State. So I don't want to completely discount them, but I'm going to mostly discount them and talk down upon them. But still, a pretty incredible day for K-State. I don't want to spend too much time lingering on the Jayhawks.
Yeah. But all of this doesn't really matter if he just randomly got 5-star status and didn't really live up to it. And despite what really salty people who are huffing an endless amount of copium on Twitter are telling you, no, he has earned every single bit of that 5-star ranking. Because it's very similar to the evaluation for Caden Massey last year, where he's just a freak athlete who should not have the athletic profile that he does at his size, except for Linkon Cure is a tight end and has upped the athleticism even more so than Caden Massey. And Caden Massey, my projection and my honest prediction and expectation is that he ends up being a first-round NFL draft pick, largely because of his insane athleticism. Linkon Cure probably dunks on Caden Massey athletically.
Yeah, I mean, Caden, or not Caden, you got me thinking about Caden Massey now, but Linkon is the latest in seemingly kind of a renaissance of Kansas high school football talent. These last couple of years have really been incredible, where in the past there's been really quality D1 guys, but it hasn't been as often that you've seen these guys that make it into the top 100 of national recruiting rankings, or at the very least are in those national conversations. But you've had Avery Johnson, Dylan Edwards, and now you have Linkon Cure, Andrew Babalola, who's not going to be coming to K-State, but he's a 5-star as well. I mean, he's from Overland Park. So 2 5-stars from the state of Kansas in the same year is I think, unprecedented completely. It's pretty rare for Kansas to have one 5-star. I think the last one before this cycle might have been like Bubba Starling, maybe back in like 2010. And he didn't even play football in college. He just became a disappointment. But it's pretty indicative of the direction that the state is going, I guess. And also, I think it's indicative that other programs are starting to realize that there really is some talent to be mined in the state, which is great for them because they're getting recognition they deserve. Not so great for us because that means that other teams are now realizing that what we've realized for the last 30, 40 years, which is that there are some really good unheralded guys out here. But back to Linkon Cure. Yeah, he's an just unprecedented athletic specimen, is what he is. He, I think, is going to retain his 5-star status pretty easily. I'll roll through some of his numbers. Last year for Goodland, he was a 3A school. He had 42 catches for 946 yards. I think technically 12 touchdowns. He lists 14, but 2 were called back for penalties. But I don't think he was on a very fantastic Goodland team. I don't remember exactly the record. But the numbers that really stand out to me are his track times. He was a 3A champion on the 300-meter hurdles. And he also won the 110-meter hurdles as a junior. He, in the 100-meter dash, ran 11.05, a 14.49 in the 110-meter hurdles, 21.9 in the 200, and then the 300 hurdles ran a 38.9 and jumped 6'2" in the high jump. So, and remember that he's doing all of that at about 6'6", 230. So that is NFL athleticism right there. And I mean, I remember all the way back in the fall, Ace and we were sharing his huddle tape every single week with each other because we remembered he was a camp offer and we liked what he had. And then we started watching his tape week to week and we realized that he was legit. And then the offers just started pouring in. And I mean, like week to week, we could track, Tennessee offered, USC offered, UCLA offered, and he started getting that respect. But K-State was there at the beginning, and K-State was the one that was there when he was a 0-star. So that ended up really paying off for K-State. But that's not to take away at all from Linkon and just how talented he is. I mean, he's a specimen. I mean, he's a really, really rare type of athlete, like a once-in-a-generation type of athlete that you're going to see at K-State.
Yeah, and I think the funniest part about us going back and forth sharing his huddle highlights is the multiple times that both of us kind of just went, well, yeah, that's definitely fair. And just sarcastically is like, yeah, that's fair. But you are right in that he is that sort of once in a generational athlete for a state that's not like Texas and Florida because they build them differently there. They construct them alternatively. But it's become a cliche, but Linkon Cure for the modern Y tight end in college football in the NFL, he has the athleticism and the build that is genuinely lab built. And it's become a cliche. It's like, oh, this guy was built in a lab. You could he's just the perfect specimen. And is he perfect? No recruit is perfect outside of maybe Trevor Lawrence. But he is, just from a purely athletic standpoint, he's the most athletic recruit that K-State has gotten out of high school. I am unsure how close the competition would be, but he's certainly the most athletic and most accomplished tight end in K-State history, which isn't difficult because the list is Ben Sinnott.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
That's it.
Lincoln Cure, the only thing that's going to hold him back from going down as the best tight end in K-State history is going to be the amount of time he spends in college, I think, because he has 3 years and out written all over him, because he does have prototypical tight end size. His game translates really well, I think, to the modern tight end. Especially if you can put on a little bit of weight and keep most of the athleticism. Um, but he's incredible. I mean, I hope that he gets to play with Avery Johnson a bit, but I mean, I think that it's been pretty well documented that there's not going to be a lot of overlap there, because like tight end's a really difficult position to learn no matter what level of football you're at. In the NFL, it's famously difficult for rookie tight ends to break out, and it's not untrue at the college level as well. I mean, it took us. Ben Sinnott was incredible, but it took him a couple of years, and it's just not often that you see true freshman tight ends really just figure everything out immediately. Now, Linkon Cure may be athletic enough that we may still see him, but you got to keep in mind that there's Garrett Oakley and Will Anseau and Andrew Metzger all ahead of him, and all three of those guys are guys that have either already shown flashes or, based on their recruiting profiles, you and I are both really high on. So it's not as if it's an empty room he's going to walk into, but at the same time, he's going to be one of those guys that wouldn't be shocking to like maybe once or twice in the season see something specific drawn up for him, just because he's that athletic. Like, he's going to be tough to keep off the field, and the only limits he's going to have are going to be the ones that I guess he places on himself, and the ones that the coaching staff, I guess, may want to use to, keep from like breaking in case of emergency too early. But like, I'm trying to temper my expectations as much as I can, but I mean, he really is different. He's a different type of prospect that doesn't come around very often. I'll talk about the new college football game here for a bit. The EA has gone on record saying that 5 stars are going to be like really, really good in the game. Like, there's going to be a noticeable difference. Like, and you watch Linkon Cure's tape compared to a lot of other tight ends. Yeah, he is a lot different than most of those guys. He does things that he moves in ways that a lot of receivers can't move, and he does that at like double the size.
Yeah, he shouldn't be able to move the way he does, and it's not just straight line either. He has a surprising amount of wiggle to him, and I'm similar to Drew Galloway in that I don't necessarily like player comps, especially very high end player comps, because I think it sets up a lot of unrealistic expectations. But Linkon Cure is the legitimate type of athlete that can become Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts wasn't a tight end. He was a tight end in name only. In college, he was just an offensive weapon. He was a go kill that guy piece, because you couldn't cover him with a safety. He was too big. You couldn't cover him with a corner. He was too big. And you couldn't cover him with a linebacker because he was too fast and he was too fluid. So in a lot of ways, he has that exact same profile of Kyle Pitts, to where he is that sort of offensive weapon who's more than just a tight end. If anything, the path for him to get playing time early is not playing tight end. It's playing big slot, which Ben Sinnott did a little bit, and I'm projecting that would probably be Anseau's role, Metzger's role this upcoming year, alongside Oakley as the true tight end and Swanson as the blocker. But it's hard to exaggerate on Linkon Cure, and I'm not saying that he's going to be Kyle Pitts out of the box. Kyle Pitts is a unicorn. Linkon Cure is not Kyle Pitts. He has a similar build and a similar archetype, but they're not the same player. That being said, if you fast forwarded 3 years from now and told me they had comparable careers and usage in college, I would be wholly unsurprised. I'd be very happy, but I would be wholly unsurprised by that information.
Yeah. It's a huge win And Lincoln Cure, my greatest hope is that whoever the quarterback is that's throwing to him most of the time is able to get it somewhere in his radius, which there's a lot of margin for error with Lincoln Cure, because I mean he is a prototype in a lot of ways, just because of how tall he is, how high he can jump, how long his arms are. Like his catch radius is going to be really incredible. But I'm hoping for a lot of tricks that we can use to get him into open space, and because he'll be able to do a lot of things that like even Ben Sinnott couldn't do, like with ease. And Ben Sinnott was a very good tight end, the best tight end in K-State history. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Lincoln Cure is utilized. I hope we see a bit of him with Avery Johnson. I imagine we don't see much, but regardless, this is the biggest one in K-State history for recruiting.
Yeah, the only one that even comes close, you're starting to talk about positional value, but purely on paper, taking positional value purely out, Lincoln Cure is the best recruit that K-State has ever landed. And I'm not going to pretend that there's multiple gaps between the tiers, but you can make an argument that there's a tier or two gap where it's just blank. And Lincoln Cure is 2 tiers above just about anyone else. You can make that argument. I wouldn't, but you could.
Yeah, you could.
But yeah, you could. Do you have any final notes about Lincoln Cure before we sign off on this shorter episode? But it's 23 minutes on a new recruit. That's insane.
Go watch his huddle tape for some fun highlights, because it really is an entertaining watch.
Yeah. And I don't think that K-State is done for this week, but we are taking the 4th off. So fingers crossed, knock on wood, but not about us taking the 4th off. That's just happening. Yeah. But for us not being done for the week, that also means no night in the Ville this week. We'll continue that next week, I would imagine. But yeah, thank you all for listening to this exciting episode of Aggieville Alleycats. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're aggievillealleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdwards00.
I am at Connor Balthazar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store or the supporters link, both in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.